Charles, what do you think about COVID's Delta variant? Well, I made videos about this last year where I said COVID is never going away. Variants are going to occur. Eventually, new strains will come. Virus is going to virus. They mutate. And they mutate to new variants. They mutate to new strains. And you have evolutionary pressure. I love it when the media says things like, all these people who have been vaccinated are being infected with the Delta variant. Well, of course, because they can't be infected with the Alpha, the original variant. Well, that original variant they're immune to for the most part. Can't get a safe harbor. So the only thing you can get infected with is the variant that has some degree of breaking through. But the fundamental dishonesty of the media is acting as if the Delta variant is an existential threat to the vaccinated. It's not. Your rate of infection is 6 times lower than the unvaccinated. Your rate of hospitalization is 24 times lower than the unvaccinated. And your rate of death is more than 24 times lower than the unvaccinated for the Delta variant. So it's not a concern when you statistically look at these things. And yeah, the viral loads are higher on, so you can get a harbor in your nose and you can technically spread it to unvaccinated people. But a fundamental question has to be asked of when does personal accountability come into play? Your vaccinated population, for all intents and purposes, still is, roughly speaking, immune to COVID. Statistically speaking, it's not a problem. If everybody had that level of resilience against these variants at the beginning of this, there would have never been lockdowns. Okay, that's just a fact, because it's better than influenza at this point in terms of every metric. And that's just verifiable. So then you have to ask the question, at what point does personal responsibility come in? If I'm vaccinated and I have a viral reservoir with a mild infection or asymptomatic infection, and I can spread that to an unvaccinated person, that unvaccinated person has had, in the United States of America in particular, every opportunity to get vaccinated. They've chosen not to. So it's their decision. It's their personal accountability. So we should shut the whole economy down to punish everybody just because a group of people didn't do something. Another thing, the intellectual dishonesty, is the equation of saying recovered is the same as unvaccinated. I've always maintained there's 2 vaccines you can take, nature's vaccine and man's vaccine. I believe in science, and I looked at all the data, I looked at all the things, asked all the critical questions, and I believe that man's vaccine is a hell of a lot better than anything nature's offering me. Natural born immunity is a high price to pay. Anosmia, you lose your sense of taste and smell, death, permanent lung damage, myocarditis, neurological problems. Guys, this is not a trivial thing. There are many people walking around with long COVID who desperately would have wished to have gotten a different option than nature's vaccine. And it's absolutely true. Statistically speaking, both routes, the most likely outcome is you're healthy and you're okay. However, when you actually get into the side effects profile, it's significantly worse with nature's vaccine. So why would you choose that? Because you're so worried that this other thing is going to do some undefined thing, change your DNA, create some bizarre side effect, give you cancer. And you always ask, well, what is the mechanism upon which that's going to happen? And everybody's a biochemist now. Everybody's a virologist now. Everybody's a doctor now. Everybody's an expert in vaccinology now. The experts in these fields who've dedicated decades of their lives and have tried very hard to explain what they've done, they don't count. They're bought and paid for, and there's a big conspiracy. So there's some guy on YouTube that used to work somewhere who said something and gives you half the story. That's the expert. And that's unfortunately the reality of COVID. No one trusts institutions anymore or credentials anymore. And there's an increasing level of polarization and radicalization that has occurred in society, to the extent where it's really hard to discern fact from fiction, to the extent that people are willing to roll the dice with their lives and hope to God that somehow their convictions are going to just guide them through all of these things. And for the most part, it works for them because statistics are on both sides, man's vaccine and nature's vaccine. But in the cases it doesn't work, it's significantly worse for one group over the other. It's entirely possible that the Pfizer vaccine that I took earlier this year has unforeseen side effects. It's entirely possible. And I looked at the data and the evidence and I said, all right, I'm going to roll the dice and try it because I have faith in certain institutions and I have faith in the data that I've received and the experimentation that's been done. And 4 billion doses have been administered. Billions of people around the world have now gotten the jab. They're doing pretty good, all things considered. Meanwhile, millions of people have died from COVID. It's a truly terrible disease for the unlucky ones who seem to have a really bad reaction to it. I also firmly believe that COVID probably came from the Wuhan lab. There's starting to be an increasing body of evidence. Used to be you couldn't even talk about it. You get a little label underneath your video, and if you're lucky, and if you're unlucky, you get just deplatformed for even uttering those words. And the WHO would just say things like, well, it didn't come from a lab. We know that with certainty, even though we didn't do any investigation at all. And we lie through our teeth about it. And I think that's why governments got so scared about COVID, because deep down inside, they actually knew the truth. And gain of function research probably produced something like this. And as a consequence, they were uncertain about what it was actually going to do. It's novel, and clearly it affects more than just your lungs. Hurts your heart, hurts your brain, and there can be all kinds of weird things. And that's why they reacted as strongly as they did, despite the fact that the mortality rate wasn't as high as originally thought. And that created even more distrust in institutions. And there's probably a global agreement that the origins will never be discovered, because the consequences of this being a lab leak are the delegitimization of the Chinese regime to a point where war could break out. And for the greater good of humanity, I guess our leaders have decided not to dig into that hole and to let this one go. Yet wisdom is lacking because there's no global call for regulation on gain and function research. Not too long ago, the avian flu was made human transmissible through that research. There was even, I think, in Nature, an article published about it. And nobody seemed to bat an eye that someone had taken a virus that tends not to spread human to human, that has a 50% mortality rate, and turn it into something that spreads human to human. And this is not done by a weapons lab, by the military, but by scientists. And what happens when hundreds and then thousands and then tens of thousands of laboratories have access to that? That's an existential problem for the human race. And instead, we can't even have that conversation. Our social media masters won't, and media masters won't allow it to be had. I think that's the saddest part of COVID, is the inability to navigate fact from fiction. The loss of trust in institutions have led to people dying, and institutions letting us down in that they prevented very necessary conversations and regulations from coming. And the next COVID is going to be a hell of a lot worse than the one that we dealt with in 2019, 2020. And a lot of people are going to die.